I entered my husband's company's luxury party with a gift only to see my husband's rich female boss on one knee proposing to him, "Will you leave your poor, impotent wife and marry me?" Then my husband said yes. So I walked away quietly and immediately canceled everything, pulling out my 67% company share worth $27 million. Minutes later, I had 27 missed calls and someone knocked at my door. I zipped up my black evening gown for tonight's company gala while Henry's phone buzzed with messages from Kristen Blackwood, his boss in Boston's most ruthless venture capitalist, discussing their plan to publicly destroy our marriage for business advantage. The proposal will happen during my keynote speech. Her message read with clinical precision. Isabella's emotional breakdown will justify the ownership restructuring we discussed. The vintage Omega watch sat wrapped on our dresser. My anniversary gift transformed into evidence of how completely I had misunderstood my role in tonight's performance. The silk fabric of my dress felt like armor as I processed the implications of what I had just read. Henry stood in our marble bathroom, humming while he adjusted his bow tie, completely unaware that his phone had revealed 6 months of coordinated deception. The messages painted a picture of calculated manipulation, with my husband and his boss orchestrating my public humiliation to seize control of Nexus Dynamics, the company I had built with my Harvard Law expertise in coding genius. My fingers traced the edges of the gift box containing the $25,000 Omega watch, a timepiece I had selected because Henry once mentioned admiring vintage Swiss craftsmanship. The irony was suffocating. I had spent weeks researching the perfect anniversary gift while he spent those same weeks planning my corporate execution with a woman who viewed our marriage as nothing more than a business obstacle requiring elimination. "Isabella, have you seen my cufflinks?" Henry called from the bathroom, his voice carrying the easy confidence of a man who believed his secrets were safe. I retrieved the platinum cufflinks from his jewelry box, noting how my hands remained steady despite the earthquake occurring inside my chest. The cufflinks bore the Nexus Dynamics logo, a symbol I had designed during our startup phase when partnership meant equality rather than elaborate performance art. Our Back Bay penthouse reflected 6 years of carefully curated success, with floor-to-ceiling windows framing Boston Harbor and furniture selected to project the image of tech royalty. Every piece told the story of Nexus Dynamics' meteoric rise, from the custom Italian leather furniture to the original artwork that cost more than most people's annual salaries. What the elegant surroundings could not convey was the mathematical truth hidden in our home safe. I owned 67% of the company, while Henry held only 33%. A distribution based on my grandmother's inheritance, funding our initial operations and my innovations generating every dollar of our current wealth. Elena Santos, my grandmother, had worked 3 jobs to build a small technology consulting firm in the 1980s, leaving me her life savings with a handwritten note in Spanish. Para Mineta Berante, build something that matters and never let anyone take credit for your work. Her words echoed in my mind as I realized I had violated her most important lesson while honoring her financial legacy. The woman who had sacrificed everything to create opportunities for future generations would be devastated to know her granddaughter had become invisible in her own success story. The morning routine continued with practiced choreography as Henry reviewed his keynote speech for tonight's investor gala. His presentation notes were printed copies of my research, annotated with explanations I had written to help him understand concepts he would present as breakthrough innovations. The neural network architecture represents a paradigm shift in machine learning capabilities, he rehearsed, stumbling slightly over terminology I had taught him during countless late-night study sessions. The technical foundations of his reputation rested entirely on algorithms I had developed during 18-hour coding marathons, while he managed strategic partnerships at exclusive conferences. My reflection in our bedroom mirror showed a woman transformed by knowledge into someone I barely recognized. Isabella Martinez, Harvard Law graduate turned computer scientist, reduced to supporting actress in her own professional biography. The black evening gown I wore was designer purchased with discretionary funds from patent royalties bearing my name as primary inventor. Yet tonight, I would attend our company's most important event as Henry's wife rather than as the architect of the innovations being celebrated. The walk-in closet contains 6 years of costumes for various corporate performances, each garment selected to project the image of supportive spouse rather than brilliant entrepreneur. Board meeting attire that conveyed professional competence without threatening masculine authority. Conference outfits that suggested technical knowledge while maintaining appropriate deference to Henry's leadership role. Tonight's gown represented the culmination of this careful image management. Elegant enough for photography while ensuring I remained decorative rather than central to any business discussions. Henry emerged from the bathroom looking every inch the successful tech executive. His appearance refined through professional styling and expensive tailoring. "You look beautiful tonight," he said, the compliment carrying the hollow ring of automatic politeness rather than genuine appreciation. His eyes held no trace of guilt or hesitation, suggesting either remarkable acting ability or complete compartmentalization of his betrayal. I wondered how long he had been practicing this performance, how many mornings he had looked at me while planning my destruction. The vintage Omega watch represented more than an anniversary gift. It symbolized 6 years of misplaced trust and willful blindness to mounting evidence of exploitation. Our early conversations had spanned hours as we debated technical possibilities and business strategies, his curiosity about my ideas matching my enthusiasm for collaboration. Gradually, those exchanges had transformed into one-sided tutorials where I explained complex concepts while he nodded and took notes for future presentations. The evolution had been so subtle that I had mistaken intellectual theft for partnership until tonight's revelation made the pattern impossible to ignore. Documents in our home safe told a different story than the one Henry would present to investors tonight. Incorporation papers I had drafted using legal expertise he had never possessed established my majority ownership of Nexus Dynamics. Patent filings detailed innovations that generated our $310 million annual revenue, each bearing my name as primary inventor. Bank records showed my grandmother's inheritance as initial funding that had transformed Henry's ambitious ideas into operational reality. These documents represented mathematical truth in a world increasingly dominated by perception management and public relations campaigns. The irony of preparing for my own corporate funeral while maintaining the facade of marital harmony created a surreal atmosphere in our penthouse. I applied makeup with mechanical precision, each stroke of foundation and lipstick contributing to the image of devoted wife attending her husband's professional triumph. The woman in the mirror looked perfect for tonight's performance, elegant and supportive and completely unprepared for the systematic destruction Kristen Blackwood had orchestrated with clinical efficiency. My phone displayed 17 missed calls from my assistant Sarah Kim, along with text messages about urgent technical issues requiring my immediate attention. The neural network optimization project we had been developing showed anomalies that could affect our next product launch. Complex algorithmic problems that required expertise Henry did not possess. Yet tonight I would sit in the audience while he accepted praise for innovations he could not debug or replicate. His reputation built entirely on foundations I had constructed through sleepless dedication to mathematical elegance and computational breakthrough. The elevator descent to our building's parking garage provided final moments of solitude before beginning tonight's performance. Henry chatted about investor expectations and networking opportunities, his excitement genuine as he anticipated professional validation and expanded business relationships. I clutched the gift box containing the Omega watch, understanding that I was about to witness the culmination of months of planning designed to transfer ownership of my life's work to people who viewed talent as commodity to be acquired rather than partnership to be honored. Our limousine pulled away from the building toward the Meridian Grand Hotel, where 300 of Boston's most influential business leaders would gather to celebrate another year of Nexus Dynamics success. The city lights blurred past tinted windows as we traveled toward what I now understood was not an anniversary celebration, but a carefully orchestrated corporate coup disguised as entertainment. The perfect life we had constructed together was about to reveal itself as performance art funded by my innovation and protected by my willingness to remain invisible in my own success story. The limousine glided through Boston's financial district, while Henry's phone continued its relentless buzzing, each notification creating a small flinch in my chest as I remembered the messages I had discovered. The device sat between us on the leather seat like a loaded weapon, its screen lighting up with incoming text that he quickly silenced without reading. His fingers moved with practice efficiency, suggesting this had become routine behavior rather than tonight's anomaly. Marcus sent the final guest list, Henry said, though I noticed he had not actually opened any messages to verify this claim. His voice carried forced casualness that made my skin crawl, the tone of someone working hard to appear normal while managing multiple deceptions. The past month had been filled with these small lies, innocent explanations for behavior that had shifted in ways I could no longer ignore. The phone calls had started 3 weeks ago, hushed conversations that ended abruptly when I entered our kitchen or home office. Henry would claim they were investor relations or board discussions, but his body language suggested something far more personal. He would lean forward when speaking, his voice dropping to intimate tones usually reserved for private moments between spouses. When I asked about specific calls, his explanations became vague and contradictory, filled with details that did not align with actual business schedules or meeting calendars. Kristen has some innovative ideas about expanding our market reach, Henry continued, his enthusiasm for her business acumen creating that familiar tightness in my chest. The way he said her name had evolved over recent weeks, from professional respect to something approaching reverence. Kristen Blackwood commanded attention in any room she entered, her reputation as Boston's most successful venture capitalist built on aggressive acquisition strategies and ruthless business instincts. Henry's growing fascination with her investment philosophy had begun innocuously enough, but now colored almost every conversation about Nexus Dynamics' future direction. The preparation for tonight's gala had revealed another layer of concerning behavior. Henry had tried on 3 different suits this afternoon, soliciting my opinion with nervous energy that seemed disconnected from celebrating our anniversary. His questions focused on which outfit would photograph best under ballroom lighting, which tie would complement stage lighting during keynote presentations. The attention to visual details suggested he was preparing for performance rather than partnership, considering how his appearance would be perceived by specific audience members rather than how he felt wearing clothes selected for our shared celebration. Did you know Kristen started her first company at 24? Henry asked, though I had not requested biographical information about his boss. His phone buzzed again, and this time I caught a glimpse of her name on the screen before he quickly turned the device face down. The frequency of their communication had increased dramatically, with messages arriving at all hours, including weekends and early mornings when professional correspondence would be unusual. Our limousine passed the Nexus Dynamics building, where 24 floors of office space housed the company I had built with algorithms designed during countless sleepless nights. The irony of viewing my life's work from the back seat of a vehicle purchased with revenues from my innovations was not lost on me, especially knowing that tonight would celebrate achievements I had created while someone else claimed the recognition. The employee dynamics at Nexus Dynamics had shifted in subtle but unmistakable ways over the past month. Conversations halted when I approached groups of staff members, their sudden silence suggesting discussions about topics I was not meant to overhear. My own technical team seemed distracted during project reviews, their usual enthusiasm for breakthrough developments dampened by undercurrents of tension I could not identify. Sarah Kim, my assistant and one of our most talented engineers, had been asking careful questions about my long-term plans for the company, her inquiries feeling more like intelligence gathering than casual conversation. Marcus Webb, Henry's assistant, had become particularly nervous during our brief interactions. His usual professional demeanor had been replaced by awkward avoidance of eye contact and stammered responses to simple questions about meeting schedules or document preparation. Yesterday, I had caught him quickly closing his laptop screen when I entered Henry's office. His flustered explanation about confidential investor materials failing to explain his obvious discomfort with my presence. The investor materials for tonight's gala had arrived without my review or approval, a departure from our established protocol that required both co-founders to sign off on strategic presentations. The documents contained proposals for restructuring company ownership in ways that would diminish my visible role while elevating external partnerships with venture capital firms. Kristen Blackwood's investment group featured prominently in these plans, with suggestions for expanded cooperation that would essentially transform Nexus Dynamics from independent startup to subsidiary operation. "She really understands the vision we have for scaling our operations," Henry said, his choice of pronouns revealing how completely he had begun to exclude me from future planning. The transition from I to we when discussing Christine's involvement suggested a partnership that extended beyond professional consultation into something approaching shared ownership of decisions that should require my input as majority stakeholder. The vintage Omega watch rested in its velvet box on my lap. The gift that had once represented 6 years of marriage now feeling more like evidence of my own naivety. Henry's distracted responses to my attempts at conversation throughout the day had created a hollow atmosphere in our penthouse, as if we were already living separate lives while sharing the same physical space. His answers to direct questions about tonight's events had been evasive, filled with references to surprises and special presentations that excluded me from planning processes. "Will you be sitting with the board members during dinner?" I asked, testing whether he would provide honest information about seating arrangements that had been finalized weeks ago. His hesitation before answering confirmed my suspicion that tonight's logistics had been designed around conversations I was not meant to participate in or overhear. The limousine turned onto Arlington Street, bringing us closer to the Meridian Grand Hotel, where 300 guests were already gathering for what I now understood was not merely a celebration of company success. Henry checked his appearance in the partition mirror one final time, his reflection showing a man preparing for performance rather than anniversary recognition. The nervous energy radiating from his carefully composed exterior suggested tonight held significance beyond what he had shared with me. My phone displayed 3 missed calls from Sarah Kim, along with text messages about urgent technical issues that would normally require immediate attention. The neural network optimization project showed anomalies that could affect our next product launch. Problems that demanded expertise Henry did not possess despite his willingness to accept credit for solutions I would provide. The timing of these technical crises felt suspicious, creating emergencies that would justify my absence from key social interactions during tonight's event. The weight of the Omega watchbox in my hands had transformed from anticipation to dread, as I recognized how completely I had misunderstood my role in tonight's performance. 6 years of marriage had taught me to read Henry's moods and motivations, but recent weeks had revealed depths of deception I had never imagined possible. The man sitting beside me had become a stranger whose motivations and loyalties had shifted in ways that threatened everything I had built through my own innovation and determination. As our limousine approached the hotel's circular driveway, I realized that tonight would not mark an anniversary celebration, but rather the culmination of careful planning designed to restructure my relationship with both my husband and my company. The perfect life we had constructed together was about to reveal itself as elaborate preparation for my systematic removal from my own success story. The Meridian Grand Hotel's circular driveway bustled with ballots, directing luxury vehicles as our limousine joined the queue of arrivals. Through tinted windows, I watched Boston's tech elite emerge from their cars in designer evening wear, their animated conversations and confident postures suggesting anticipation for tonight's entertainment. The hotel's facade blazed with warm lighting that transformed the entrance into a stage set, complete with red carpet and photographers positioned to capture every arrival for tomorrow's business publications. Henry straightened his bow tie one final time as our driver opened the passenger door, his nervous energy palpable in the confined space. "Remember to smile for the cameras," he said, though his own expression looked strained beneath the practice charm. The vintage Omega watch nestled in my purse felt heavier with each passing moment, its weight a constant reminder of how completely I had misunderstood tonight's significance. The ballroom doors opened to reveal a scene designed to impress the most jaded observers of corporate excess. Crystal chandeliers suspended from coffered ceilings cast prismatic light across marble floors, polished to mirror perfection, while 300 guests moved through the space with choreographed elegance. Conversations created a symphony of ambition and networking that usually energized me. But tonight, the familiar sounds felt ominous, charged with undercurrents of anticipation that made my skin crawl. Henry's hands settled on my lower back as we entered, but his eyes immediately began scanning the crowd for someone else. His body language screamed distraction despite the perfectly rehearsed smile he offered to photographers who captured our arrival for business journals and society pages. The disconnect between his physical presence beside me and his obvious mental focus elsewhere created an unsettling atmosphere that seemed to affect other guests as well. "Isabella, you look stunning tonight," commented Margaret Chin, a board member whose husband ran one of Boston's largest investment firms. Her compliment felt perfunctory, delivered while her attention focused on Henry's reactions to various attendees rather than my actual appearance. The subtle shift in social dynamics suggested that others had noticed changes in our marriage before I had fully acknowledged them myself. Waiters circulated with champagne flutes and canopies that represented the kind of catering budget usually reserved for corporate celebrations of major milestones. The investor guest list included names from every significant venture capital firm in New England, along with representatives from technology companies whose partnerships could transform Nexus Dynamics from successful startup to industry leader. The scale of tonight's event suggested purposes beyond simple anniversary recognition. "There's Kristen," Henry said, his voice carrying warmth that made my chest tighten with recognition. Kristen Blackwood commanded attention from the moment she entered the ballroom, her presence transforming casual conversations into focused networking opportunities as guests positioned themselves for potential introductions. Her reputation as Boston's most successful venture capitalist preceded her into every room, but tonight she seemed to carry additional authority that suggested special significance for this particular gathering. The dinner service proceeded with military precision, each course timed to maintain conversation flow while building anticipation for evening presentations. I found myself seated at the head table beside Henry with perfect views of the stage where keynote speeches would celebrate another year of Nexus Dynamics growth and innovation. The seating arrangement felt deliberately designed to ensure my visibility during whatever performance had been planned for my benefit. Henry's phone buzzed regularly throughout dinner, each notification creating small flinches that suggested nervousness rather than routine business communication. His responses to my attempts at conversation became increasingly distracted, his attention divided between maintaining appearances at our table and monitoring developments I could not identify. The man sitting beside me had transformed into someone whose motivations and loyalties had shifted in ways that threatened everything familiar about our relationship. "Ladies and gentlemen," announced the master of ceremonies as dessert service concluded and stage lighting shifted to indicate the beginning of formal presentations. "Please join me in welcoming Kristen Blackwood, whose vision for strategic partnerships continues to revolutionize how we approach technology investment and innovation." The applause that greeted Kristen's appearance carried genuine enthusiasm from guests who recognized her influence in shaping Boston's technology landscape. Her commanding presence as she approached the podium suggested comfort with public speaking and confidence in her message. Though something in her expression hinted at purposes beyond standard investor relations presentations. Tonight, we celebrate not just financial success, but the personal relationships that make transformative partnerships possible. Kristen began, her voice carrying clearly across the ballroom through wireless microphones that ensured every word reached every corner. The opening seemed conventional enough, focusing on familiar themes of collaboration and shared vision that characterized most corporate celebrations. My stomach began to drop as her speech shifted into more personal territory, building towards something that made the entire room lean forward in collective anticipation. The energy became electric with what I could only describe as bloodlust disguised as entertainment. 300 guests sensing drama approaching with the instincts of predators detecting wounded prey. When Kristen stepped away from the podium and dropped to one knee while producing a handheld microphone, the crowd's reaction confirmed my worst fears about tonight's actual purpose. Conversations halted entirely as every guest focused on the stage performance unfolding before them, their expressions suggesting they had been prepared for this moment while I remained completely unaware of my role in their entertainment. "Henry Martinez," Kristen said, her voice carrying across marble walls with clinical precision designed for maximum impact. "Will you leave your poor, impotent wife and marry me?" The words struck like physical blows, each syllable calculated for maximum humiliation, while 300 phones emerged simultaneously to capture my destruction in high definition. The public branding of me as poor and impotent felt like character assassination designed to justify whatever corporate restructuring would follow this performance, reducing my identity to obstacles that needed removal rather than contributions that deserved recognition. Henry's acceptance came without hesitation, his voice strong and clear as he said yes to a woman who had just systematically demolished my dignity in front of Boston's most influential business leaders. The word echoed off marble walls like a gunshot, final and irreversible in its implications for both our marriage and my future involvement with the company I had built through my own innovation and determination. The applause that followed sounded like artillery fire in my ears as 300 guests celebrated the systematic destruction of my life, their laughter and cheers echoing through a space that suddenly felt like a coliseum designed for gladiatorial combat. I watched my husband embrace Kristen while cameras flashed around them, documenting the moment my marriage officially became performance art, designed for someone else's entertainment and corporate advantage. The vintage Omega watch in my purse felt like dead weight, a $25,000 symbol of love offered to a man who had just traded me for a better business opportunity. 6 years of marriage dissolved into strategic calculation, leaving me sitting alone at the head table, while guests offered congratulations to the couple who had just publicly humiliated me for their own advancement. While the crowd expected tears, dramatic confrontation, or emotional collapse that would provide additional entertainment value, I chose something far more dangerous than any of them could have anticipated: dignified silence that left them hungry for a show I would not provide. My refusal to perform according to their expectations, creating an uncomfortable energy that began to affect the celebration's momentum. My heels clicked against marble as I walked toward the exit, each step measured and deliberate, while conversations halted around me and guests strained to witness the breakdown they had paid to observe. The gift box remained clutched in my hands, no longer a gesture of love, but evidence of the last kindness I would ever show a man who had mistaken my generosity for weakness and my partnership for subordination. Behind me, Henry and Kristen continued accepting congratulations from people who had just witnessed a corporate acquisition disguised as romantic proposal, their celebration growing louder as I disappeared into the night that would mark the beginning of their education about who actually controlled the company they thought they had just acquired. The penthouse elevator ascended through 30 floors of silence, each level marking my transition from victim to strategist. The city lights of Boston spread beneath me through the glass walls, millions of illuminated windows representing lives continuing their normal patterns while mine underwent complete reconstruction. The vintage Omega watch remained clutched in my hands, no longer a gift, but evidence of the last gesture I would make as someone else's supporting character. Our front door closed behind me with finality that seemed to echo through marble hallways designed to impress visitors who would never come again. The space felt different now, transformed from shared sanctuary into operational headquarters for the systematic dismantling of everything Henry thought he controlled. Each piece of furniture, every carefully selected artwork, all the symbols of our supposed partnership now revealed themselves as props in a performance I had funded without understanding my role. The wedding photograph on our living room wall smiled back at me with cruel irony, showing two people who believed they were building something together when only one of them was actually contributing substance. Behind that silver frame lay the wall safe, containing 6 years of careful documentation, legal papers that told the mathematical truth about ownership, innovation, and financial responsibility. My fingers entered the combination with steady precision, each number representing a date that mattered more than the anniversary we had supposedly celebrated tonight. The incorporation papers spread across our dining table like evidence in a corporate trial. Each document bearing my signature as primary founder, while Henry's name appeared only as minority stakeholder. The legal language I had drafted using Harvard law expertise created an unbreakable foundation of ownership rights that no amount of charm or public relations could overcome. Patent filings detailed every innovation that generated our wealth, each bearing my name as primary inventor alongside technical descriptions that proved I alone possessed the expertise to create breakthrough algorithms. Bank records revealed the source of our initial funding with damning clarity. My grandmother's inheritance had provided the capital that transformed Henry's ambitious ideas into operational reality. Her life savings invested in a company that would honor her memory through genuine innovation rather than corporate theater. Elena Santos had worked 3 jobs to build something meaningful, leaving me resources to continue her legacy of authentic achievement, rather than borrowed glory. The 67% ownership stake stared back at me from official papers, a mathematical truth that contradicted every public narrative about our partnership. These documents represented more than legal protection. They were weapons I had never expected to use against the man I had loved and trusted with everything I had built. The irony of preparing to destroy someone using documents I had created to protect our shared future was not lost on me. My laptop connected to Nexus Dynamics financial systems with passwords only I knew, revealing the intricate web of authorization protocols I had designed during our early startup days when trust meant sharing access to everything. The security architecture I had built to protect our company from external threats now became the mechanism for defending against internal betrayal. Every safeguard working exactly as intended, despite purposes I had never anticipated. The financial records displayed with spreadsheet precision told the story of systematic exploitation that had funded Henry's transformation from startup founder to celebrated entrepreneur. $27 million in personal expenses appeared in detailed transaction records. Each vacation disguised as business development, every consulting fee that somehow involved 5-star resorts, all the executive perks that had built his reputation while diminishing our company's actual operational capabilities. European investor tours, Caribbean strategy retreats, Manhattan networking events that cost more than most companies' annual budgets. The documentation revealed a pattern of spending that treated corporate funds as personal checking accounts while I worked 18-hour days to generate the revenue that funded his lifestyle. Every receipt told the story of a man who had confused access with ownership, who had mistaken my generosity for weakness. My fingers hovered over the keyboard as I realized that the woman who built the system retained ultimate authority over how it operated. The authorization protocols I had designed would now serve justice with the same precision they had once provided protection. Each security measure becoming a tool for systematic dismantling of access Henry had never actually earned through his own contributions. The network shutdown began with surgical precision, each frozen account representing years of stolen credit and misplaced trust. Travel bookings disappeared from reservation systems as corporate credit cards lost authorization for future transactions. The European investor tour Henry had planned with Kristen evaporated into digital nothingness, along with hotel reservations, private jet charters, and restaurant bookings that would have continued his performance of success funded by my innovations. Corporate cards declined across multiple merchant systems as I revoked authorization for personal expenses that had masqueraded as business development. The operational freeze locked $27 million behind protocols that required my personal approval, instantly transforming the celebrated Coco into someone who could not access a penny of the company he claimed to run. Each keystroke represented justice, served with mathematical precision. Consequences delivered through systems I had designed when partnership meant collaboration rather than exploitation. My phone began buzzing with panicked calls as vendors, employees, and business partners discovered that Nexus Dynamics had suddenly become unavailable for all financial transactions. The frequency of notifications suggested word was spreading quickly through networks of suppliers and service providers who depended on our company for payment. Henry's assistant, Marcus, would be fielding increasingly frantic inquiries about declined payments and frozen accounts, his explanations becoming more desperate as he realized the scope of the financial lockdown. The legal document I drafted represented the culmination of everything I had learned during years of building companies and protecting intellectual property. Each clause was designed to systematically dismantle the life Henry had built on my work, written with the same precision I once used to code our most complex algorithms. The terms would reshape his understanding of ownership, contribution, and consequence with legal language that left no room for negotiation or misinterpretation. Immediate resignation as Cosio would strip away the title that had provided platform for accepting credit he had never earned. Permanent ban on Kristen's involvement with Nexus Dynamics would eliminate the external threat that had orchestrated tonight's corporate coup disguised as romantic theater. $27 million in structured repayment over 4 years would ensure accountability for every personal expense he had charged to company accounts while claiming to build our empire. Public acknowledgement of my true role as founder would correct the historical record that had celebrated him as visionary entrepreneur, while relegating me to supporting character in my own success story. The comprehensive non-disclosure agreement would prevent him from writing memoirs, giving interviews, or speaking at conferences about experiences he had never actually lived, innovations he had never created, or business decisions he had never made. The envelope sat sealed on our coffee table like a legal explosive device containing mathematical proof that actions have consequences and that the woman who built the theater retains authority to decide who performs on its stage. Each page represented justice, served with precision that would make my grandmother proud. Accountability delivered through documentation that proved authentic achievement always overcomes borrowed glory when legal reality confronts manufactured perception. The combination of technical expertise, legal knowledge, and financial control I possessed would now serve purposes I had never intended when building systems designed to protect rather than punish. But Henry had chosen performance over partnership, and Kristen had orchestrated humiliation disguised as entertainment. Now they would both discover that mathematical truth eventually overcomes even the most sophisticated public relations campaigns. The morning sun cast geometric patterns across our marble floors through floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the sealed envelope that would reshape Henry's understanding of ownership and consequence. I had slept surprisingly well for someone who had just orchestrated the systematic dismantling of her husband's empire. The peace of finally taking action, replacing years of growing resentment with something approaching satisfaction. My coffee tasted better than it had in months, each sip representing freedom from pretending that performance and partnership were equivalent. The intercom buzzed at precisely 9:15. Patrick's voice carrying through the speaker with professional concern that suggested unusual circumstances. "Mrs. Martinez, there's a gentleman here from Nexus Dynamics, Marcus Webb. He seems quite distressed and insists he needs to speak with you immediately about urgent company matters." The timing was perfect. allowing Henry's assistant to discover the scope of last night's consequences during normal business hours when the impact would reverberate through every vendor, partner, and stakeholder who depended on our company for financial transactions. Marcus emerged from the elevator looking like someone who had survived a natural disaster. His usually immaculate appearance replaced by rumpled clothes and the wild-eyed desperation of a man whose professional world had collapsed overnight. His designer suit, typically pressed to perfection, showed wrinkles that suggested he had slept in his office while fielding increasingly panicked calls from vendors whose payments had mysteriously evaporated. Dark circles under his eyes indicated the kind of sleepless night that comes from discovering that systems you thought you understood were actually controlled by someone else entirely. "Mrs. Martinez," he said, his voice cracking with exhaustion and barely controlled panic. "We have a situation, multiple situations. Everything is frozen." He clutched a coffee cup with hands that shook so violently, I worried he might drop it on our marble floor. The caffeine clearly insufficient to combat whatever pharmaceutical assistance he had needed to function after discovering the scope of his employer's financial paralysis. I gestured for him to sit on our Italian leather sofa, noting how he perched on the edge like someone prepared to flee at the first sign of additional bad news. "Tell me exactly what you've discovered," I said, settling into the opposite chair with the calm authority of someone who knew precisely what information he would provide. Because I had designed every aspect of the crisis he was experiencing. The corporate credit cards started declining around midnight. Marcus began, his words tumbling over each other with the desperation of someone delivering bad news to the only person who might possess solutions. Hotel reservations for the European investor tour were canceled automatically. The payroll system shows insufficient authorization for this week's employee payments. Vendor invoices are being rejected by our accounting software. Even basic office supply orders are getting declined. His face cycled through confusion, recognition, and growing horror as he continued cataloging the financial apocalypse. The conference room booking for today's emergency board meeting was canceled because our corporate account couldn't process the payment. 3 investors have already called asking why their money transfers for the new funding round are showing authorization errors. Anne Christriston Blackwood's office has been calling every hour demanding explanations for why her consulting fee payment was reversed. "Can you fix this?" he pleaded, still believing this represented a technical glitch rather than precision warfare designed by the woman who had built every system he was describing. Henry said, "You would know how to restore access to the operational accounts." He mentioned something about security protocols you designed that might have malfunctioned during last night's network updates. I watched his growing horror as understanding dawned that he was not dealing with technical failures but with consequences for actions taken at last night's gala. "Marcus," I said, with the patience of someone explaining basic mathematics to a child, "there are no technical glitches. There are no malfunction security protocols. The system is working exactly as I designed it to work." The envelope containing Henry's terms of surrender sat on our coffee table like legal ordnance, each page representing the systematic dismantling of assumptions about ownership, authority, and access that had governed Nexus dynamics for the past 6 years. I handed the sealed packet to Marcus, watching his face transform as he realized he was carrying a corporate death sentence disguised as legal documentation. "Tell Henry the system is working exactly as designed," I said with the calm authority of someone who had spent 6 years watching her innovations attributed to others while funding their lifestyle through algorithms they could not understand or replicate. These documents contain his new reality. He has 24 hours to respond. Marcus accepted the envelope like someone handling radioactive material, his hands trembling as he understood that he was carrying news that would redefine Henry's relationship with the company he thought he controlled. What should I tell the employees, the vendors, the investors who are demanding explanations for declined payments and canceled meetings? "Tell them the truth," I replied. "Tell them that sometimes when you mistake access for ownership, you discover that the person who built the system retains ultimate authority over how it operates. tell them that mathematical truth eventually overcomes even the most sophisticated public relations campaigns. The elevator doors closed on a man who finally understood that supporting characters sometimes write their own scripts. His footsteps echoing through the hallway as he carried news that would transform Henry's understanding of who actually owned the empire he had claimed to run. Marcus looked like a messenger in a war zone, which in many ways accurately described his new role in the corporate conflict that was just beginning. My phone had been buzzing constantly since 6 a.m. this morning. The notifications creating a digital symphony of panic as Henry's world crumbled in real time. 27 missed calls within the first 3 hours, each representing another piece of his carefully constructed facade falling apart as vendors, partners, and investors discovered that their golden boy could not access the funds needed to maintain his professional reputation. Kristen Blackwood's name appeared repeatedly between calls from board members who were learning that last night's romantic theater had been performed without understanding the financial architecture that made such gestures possible. Investment partners were discovering that their new business relationship with Henry depended on resources he had never actually controlled. Corporate accounts that required authorization from someone who had no intention of enabling their continued exploitation. I silenced the device and placed it face down on our dining table, savoring the mathematical precision of consequences unfolding exactly as I had designed them. The quiet in our penthouse felt sacred after years of noise and performance. The first genuine peace I had experienced since Henry forgot that partnerships require recognition rather than systematic erasure. Each unanswered call represented justice served with algorithmic efficiency, accountability delivered through systems I had built when trust meant collaboration rather than exploitation. The business partners who had celebrated Henry's transformation from married entrepreneur to available acquisition target were discovering that corporate romance required resources the lover had never possessed. Kristen's investment strategy was unraveling as she learned that Henry's access to Nexus Dynamics operational funds had been a privilege rather than a right authorization that could be revoked by the person who had actually built the company being acquired. The afternoon passed in contemplative satisfaction as I reviewed patent applications for innovations that would revolutionize machine learning applications in healthcare diagnostics. My technical work continued with focused intensity that had been missing during years of watching Henry accept credit for breakthroughs he could not explain to investors who assumed his public recognition reflected actual expertise rather than borrowed glory. At 11:45 that evening, desperate knocking echoed through our penthouse as Henry returned home, transformed from tech royalty to emotional wreckage. The sound carried the frantic rhythm of someone whose perfect plan had become perfect disaster, whose corporate acquisition, disguised as romance, had backfired with mathematical precision that left no room for negotiation or appeal. I opened the door to find a man who had spent 12 hours calling lawyers, accountants, and anyone else who might explain how his carefully orchestrated coup had resulted in complete financial paralysis. His designer suit showed wrinkles that suggested he had been sleeping in his office. His confident demeanor replaced by wild desperation that made him almost unrecognizable as the person who had accepted Kristen's proposal with such authority less than 24 hours earlier. "You cannot destroy us like this," he whispered. The words revealing fundamental delusion that there remained an us to destroy, when in reality there had not been genuine partnership for years. Only performance art, funded by my innovation and protected by his willful blindness to mathematical truth about ownership and contribution. Henry stepped across the threshold of our penthouse like a man entering his own tomb. His designer suit wrinkled beyond recognition, and his confident demeanor completely shattered. The elevator ride up 30 floors had apparently given him time to rehearse explanations that sounded increasingly desperate with each word he spoke. His hands shook as he closed the door behind him, the simple action requiring visible effort from someone whose world had collapsed in the span of 12 hours. "Isabella, we need to talk," he said, his voice carrying the hollow authority of someone who had forgotten that authority requires actual power rather than assumed privilege. The marble floors amplified each footstep as he moved through our living room, his expensive Italian leather shoes clicking against surfaces that my algorithms had purchased while he attended networking dinners disguised as strategic planning sessions. I remained seated on our sofa, the legal documents spread across the coffee table between us like evidence in a corporate trial. The vintage Omega watch sat unopened beside the surrender terms, its velvet box serving as a reminder of how completely I had misunderstood my role in tonight's performance until discovering the truth about months of coordinated deception. "You have to understand," Henry began, his words tumbling over each other with the desperation of someone whose carefully rehearsed explanations were crumbling under pressure. Kristen's proposal was not what it seemed. It was a test, a way to make you fight for our marriage and prove your commitment to our partnership. She said you had become too comfortable, too complacent about what we built together. The delusion embedded in his explanation cut deeper than any betrayal could have managed. I watched him pace our living room while constructing elaborate justifications for systematic humiliation. His mind apparently capable of transforming corporate acquisition strategy into relationship therapy through sheer force of denial. The man who had stood on stage accepting congratulations for my innovations was now trying to convince me that public devastation had been designed for my own benefit. "Henry," I said, my voice steady with the patience of someone explaining basic mathematics to a particularly slow student. "You spent $27 million of my money. The math is not complicated." The documentation spread across our coffee table told a story that no amount of creative explanation could alter. Each receipt represented corporate funds treated as personal checking accounts. Every authorization revealing a pattern of systematic exploitation that had funded his lifestyle while I worked 18-hour days to generate the revenue he was spending. European investor tours that cost more than most companies' annual budgets. Caribbean strategy retreats disguised as business development. Manhattan networking events that achieved nothing beyond building his social connections at my company's expense. That was our money. Henry protested, his voice rising with each failed attempt to justify the unjustifiable joint assets from our shared success. Partnership means sharing resources and opportunities. I pulled out the incorporation papers I had drafted using Harvard law expertise he had never possessed. The legal language establishing ownership percentages that contradicted every assumption about our business relationship. I own 67% of Nexus Dynamics. You own 33%. These documents bear my signature as primary founder, while your name appears only as minority stakeholder. Patent filings detailed every innovation that generated our wealth, each bearing my name as primary inventor, alongside technical descriptions that proved I alone possessed the expertise to create breakthrough algorithms. Bank records showed my grandmother's inheritance as initial funding that had transformed his ambitious ideas into operational reality. Every dollar traced directly to investments I had made when partnership meant collaboration rather than systematic exploitation. "The company belongs to both of us," Henry insisted, though his protests crumbled against mathematical evidence that ownership was not determined by public relations campaigns or magazine profiles. 6 years of building this together. 6 years of shared sacrifice and mutual support. "Shared sacrifice?" I asked, noting how the phrase sounded increasingly hollow when applied to someone whose contributions had consisted primarily of accepting credit for work he could not replicate or explain. "You built a reputation on innovations you cannot debug. You gave keynote speeches about algorithms you cannot understand. You accepted awards for breakthroughs you did not create." The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. Technical documentation proved that every system generating our revenue had been designed during my sleepless nights of coding, while Henry managed strategic partnerships at exclusive conferences. Financial records showed that every dollar of initial funding had come from my grandmother's inheritance, invested in a company that honored her legacy of authentic achievement rather than borrowed glory. When Henry suggested using Kristen's recorded proposal as leverage against her, I pulled out my phone and deleted the video in front of him. watching his last hope for redemption disappear into digital nothingness. The action was deliberate and final, demonstrating that I possessed something far more powerful than embarrassing footage. "I do not need blackmail," I told him, my voice carrying the steady authority of someone who held ownership papers, patent filings, and 6 years of documentation proving exactly who built this company and who merely pretended to run it. "I have mathematical truth." His face crumpled as understanding finally penetrated the elaborate justifications he had constructed to avoid confronting his own irrelevance to the company's actual operations. The video deletion was not mercy, but strategy proof that I did not need to destroy others to reclaim what had always been mine through innovation, funding, and legal ownership. The surrender document represented the culmination of everything I had learned about protecting intellectual property and corporate governance. Each clause was written with surgical precision, designed to systematically dismantle the life Henry had built on my work, while ensuring he could never again exploit innovations he had not created or funding he had not provided. "You cannot be serious about these terms," Henry said, his voice breaking as he read through immediate resignation as co-CEO, permanent ban on Kristen's involvement, 27 million in structured repayment, public acknowledgement of my true role as founder, and comprehensive non-disclosure agreement that would silence him completely. "Every clause reflects the mathematical reality of ownership and contribution," I replied, watching him struggle with concepts that should have been obvious to anyone actually involved in building a company rather than merely performing the role of successful entrepreneur. "Sign the documents or face litigation that will make tonight's financial freeze seem generous." Henry's hands trembled as he signed each page, his pen moving with the desperate efficiency of someone who finally understood they had been playing poker with the casino owner. Every initial and signature represented another piece of his carefully constructed identity crumbling under the weight of legal reality. Each clause cutting away access to empire I had built while he managed strategic partnerships at 5-star resorts. I watched him accept terms that would reshape his understanding of ownership, contribution, and consequence. The resignation stripped away titles that had provided platform for accepting credit he had never earned. The financial repayment ensured accountability for every personal expense charged to company accounts. The public acknowledgement would correct historical records that had celebrated him as visionary entrepreneur while relegating me to supporting character in my own success story. The comprehensive non-disclosure agreement represented perhaps the most devastating clause, preventing him from writing memoirs, giving interviews, or speaking at conferences about experiences he had never actually lived. The man who had built his reputation on borrowed glory would spend the next 5 years in enforced silence, unable to monetize stories about innovations he had not created or business decisions he had not made. The documents became his confession, a legal admission that 6 years of stolen credit were finally being returned to their rightful owner. Each signature acknowledged that mathematical truth eventually overcomes even the most sophisticated public relations campaigns. That authentic achievement always prevails when legal reality confronts manufactured perception. As Henry completed the final signature, the transformation from celebrated entrepreneur to minority stakeholder in a company he had never actually controlled was complete. The perfect life we had constructed together revealed itself as performance art funded by my innovation and protected by his willful blindness to ownership documents that had always told a different story than the one he presented to investors and business journalists. The signed documents lay scattered across our coffee table like the remnants of Henry's former identity. Each page bearing his signature, acknowledging the mathematical reality of ownership and contribution that had always governed Nexus dynamics. His departure from our penthouse felt anticlimactic after the systematic dismantling of everything he thought he controlled. The elevator doors closing on a man who finally understood the difference between access and authority, between performance and actual achievement. The emergency board meeting convened at 8:00 in the morning, barely 6 hours after Henry had signed his surrender. The glass-walled conference room on the 32nd floor of our office building felt like a corporate tribunal where the verdict had already been decided. 10 board members arranging themselves around the mahogany table with expressions ranging from confusion to carefully concealed panic. Their expensive suits and practiced confidence could not mask the fundamental uncertainty of people who had just discovered they had been supporting the wrong player in a game whose rules they had never actually understood. I entered the boardroom with the manila folder containing the complete restructuring of Nexus Dynamics, my heels clicking against marble floors with the measured rhythm of justice finally being served. The board members who had spent 6 years deferring to Henry's charm and networking abilities now faced the woman who had actually built the company they thought they were governing, their nervous glances suggesting belated recognition of how completely they had misunderstood the power dynamics within their own organization. "Good morning," I said, settling into the chair at the head of the table that had always belonged to me by right of majority ownership, though I had allowed Henry to occupy it for appearances that no longer mattered. "We have significant changes to discuss regarding Nexus Dynamics' leadership structure and operational authority." Margaret Chin, our longest-serving board member, spoke first with the careful tone of someone navigating unexpectedly treacherous territory. "Isabella, we understand there have been some developments following last night's investor gala. Henry mentioned urgent matters requiring board attention, but he was somewhat unclear about specifics. The understatement would have been amusing if the situation had not been so serious. Henry's 12 hours of frantic phone calls to lawyers, accountants, and crisis management consultants had apparently failed to produce coherent explanations for the systematic financial paralysis that had transformed Nexus Dynamics from operational company to corporate ghost overnight. Henry Martinez has submitted his immediate resignation as COCO of Nexus Dynamics. I announced, my voice carrying the surgical precision of someone delivering a medical diagnosis. Effective immediately, I am assuming sole control of all company operations with comprehensive veto authority over expenditures, strategic partnerships, and personnel decisions. The silence that followed felt heavy with implications that board members were only beginning to calculate. 6 years of deference to Henry's public persona had created assumptions about authority and decision-making that were now crumbling under the weight of legal documentation that told a completely different story about ownership and control. Furthermore, I continued, noting how each sentence cut through the boardroom's tension like a scalpel, Kristen Blackwood and all entities associated with her investment group are permanently banned from any involvement with Nexus Dynamics, including consulting arrangements, partnership discussions, or casual contact with company personnel. The corporate death sentence hung in the air, while board members began calculating how this fundamental reshuffling would affect their own positions, stock options, and professional reputations. The mathematical elegance of ownership papers was overcoming years of public relations and networking, proving that documentation defeats charm when legal reality collides with manufactured perception. David Park, our technology advisor, cleared his throat with obvious discomfort. "Isabella, these are significant changes. Perhaps we should schedule additional meetings to discuss the implications and ensure proper transition procedures." I opened the manila folder and distributed copies of the incorporation papers, patent filings, and financial records that had always governed our company's actual structure. "The documents you are reviewing establish that I own 67% of Nexus Dynamics, while Henry owns 33%. Every innovation generating our revenue bears my name as primary inventor. All initial funding came from my personal resources. The revelation transformed the boardroom atmosphere as sophisticated investors discovered they had fundamentally misunderstood the company they had been advising for years. Patent filings proved that breakthrough algorithms credited to visionary leadership had actually been developed by someone they had treated as supportive spouse rather than brilliant entrepreneur. Henry will be making a public statement to correct the historical record. I announced, producing the confession he had signed hours earlier. The statement acknowledges my role as founder, architect, and majority stakeholder of Nexus Dynamics, along with his resignation from all operational responsibilities. The document I read aloud became Henry's final humiliation, as board members listened to a complete confession that dissolved 6 years of stolen credit in carefully crafted paragraphs. His voice recorded during our penthouse confrontation cracked with each admission that he had been the spokesperson while I did the actual work of building something meaningful. I acknowledged that Isabella Martinez is the true founder and majority owner of Nexus Dynamics. The statement read, "She developed our core algorithms, filed our patents, and made the strategic decisions that built this company. I served as public representative while she provided the technical expertise and innovative vision that generated our success." Board members watched in fascination and horror as the confession continued, transforming a celebrated entrepreneur into corporate fraud in the space of a single press release. Each paragraph represented a nail in the coffin of Henry's carefully constructed reputation, demonstrating that mathematical truth eventually overcomes even the most sophisticated public relations campaigns. The technical innovations credited to our leadership team were designed and implemented by Isabella Martinez during 18-hour development cycles, while I managed external relationships and investor communications. Her contributions to artificial intelligence and machine learning represent genuine breakthrough achievements that I had the privilege of presenting to business audiences. The confession became a masterclass in consequence proof that authentic achievement always prevails when legal reality confronts manufactured perception. Board members realized they were witnessing the systematic correction of historical records that had celebrated borrowed glory while diminishing actual innovation. As sole CEO of Nexus Dynamics, my first executive decisions prioritized substance over style, replacing champagne-fueled networking events with actual engineering excellence and meaningful innovation. The employees who had worked under Henry's regime discovered what it meant to have leadership that understood the technology they were developing. Their relief palpable as technical discussions became substantive rather than superficial performance art. Effective immediately, we are restructuring our development priorities to focus on breakthrough applications rather than public relations opportunities. I announced to the engineering teams who had been marginalized, while Henry chased magazine covers and conference speaking engagements. Your technical expertise will guide our strategic direction rather than being subordinated to networking and social media considerations. The office atmosphere transformed from performance art to productive collaboration within hours of Henry's departure. Engineers who had been presenting complex ideas to someone who could only smile and nod during technical reviews suddenly found themselves working with leadership that could debug their code, optimize their algorithms, and contribute meaningfully to problem-solving discussions. Sarah. Kim, my former assistant, who possessed one of the most brilliant minds in machine learning optimization, accepted promotion to Chief Technology Officer with enthusiasm that had been suppressed during years of watching her innovations attributed to Henry's visionary leadership. Her first presentation to the board detailed breakthrough developments in neural network architecture that would revolutionize predictive analytics across multiple industries. The transformation of Nexus Dynamics from corporate theater to authentic innovation hub felt like restoration rather than revolution. Returning the company to principles that had originally motivated my grandmother's investment in meaningful achievement rather than borrowed glory. Mathematical truth had finally overcome manufactured perception, establishing operational priorities based on genuine expertise rather than social media presence. The board meeting concluded with unanimous approval of the leadership transition, their signatures acknowledging that they had been governing a company they had never actually understood until legal documentation forced recognition of ownership structures that had always told a different story than the one presented to business journalists and industry publications. The board members filed out of the conference room with the subdued efficiency that follows major corporate restructuring. Their conversations muted as they processed the fundamental shift in leadership and the revelation that they had been advising a company they had never truly understood. The glass walls of our executive floor reflected the morning sunlight streaming through Boston's financial district, illuminating an office space that would now operate according to principles of authentic innovation rather than performance art. disguised as entrepreneurship. 9 months later, I found myself standing in a completely different kitchen, brewing coffee with equipment I had purchased myself rather than corporate accounts funded by algorithms I had coded during sleepless nights. The Cambridge townhouse represented everything. The Back Bay penthouse had not comfort over appearances, functionality over Instagram potential, genuine satisfaction over manufactured luxury. Each piece of furniture reflected choices made for personal preference rather than investor impressions, creating spaces designed for living rather than performing. The morning light filtered through windows I could open to actual fresh air, a simple pleasure that had been impossible in the climate-controlled environment of our former penthouse. The coffee maker was a modest German model that produced excellent results without requiring technical expertise or pretentious explanations about single-origin beans and artisanal roasting processes. Everything in my new environment reflected values that prioritized substance over style, authenticity over appearances. My MIT visiting professorship had connected me with graduate students whose genuine curiosity about machine learning frameworks reminded me why I had fallen in love with programming before it became entangled with patents, profit margins, and public relations campaigns. These young minds approached complex algorithms with the same passion I had experienced during my early coding sessions, when breakthrough technology felt like art and elegant solutions represented pure intellectual satisfaction. Professor Martinez, your approach to neural network optimization has opened entirely new research directions for our healthcare applications, said David Liu, a doctoral candidate whose dissertation would revolutionize diagnostic imaging through artificial intelligence. His enthusiasm for technical excellence rather than networking opportunities represented everything I had hoped to find in academic collaboration. The absence of staff, marble countertops, and performance art disguised as domestic life had created space for the quiet satisfaction of finally matching my environment to my actual values. No longer did I wake up in surroundings designed to impress visitors who viewed my home as a set piece in someone else's success story. Every detail of my new life reflected authentic choices rather than corporate image management. Quantum labs represented everything Henry's version of Nexus Dynamics had never been. Substance over style, innovation over networking, solutions over social media presence. Dr. Sarah Kim's leadership of the Distributed Computing Initiative had attracted contracts with 3 major healthcare systems and 2 Fortune 500 companies. Their success measured in solved problems rather than magazine profiles or conference keynotes. The $50 million investment I had made in quantum labs generated returns measured in human impact rather than shareholder value, funding research that would revolutionize medical diagnosis and treatment rather than producing quarterly reports designed to impress investors who had never understood the technology they were funding. Watching brilliant minds collaborate on breakthrough applications reminded me of my own early days, when code was poetry and technological innovation represented art rather than business strategy. The distributed computing framework we developed will reduce diagnostic imaging processing time from hours to minutes, Sarah explained during our quarterly review meeting. 3 hospitals are already reporting improved patient outcomes through faster identification of critical conditions. Her passion for technical excellence rather than public recognition represented the kind of leadership I should have been supporting all along. Instead of funding Henry's transformation from entrepreneur to corporate celebrity through innovations he could not understand or replicate, the handwritten letter from Henry arrived on a Tuesday morning. His careful script acknowledging recognition that had come too late to preserve the relationship he had systematically destroyed through years of systematic credit theft. The Portland Community College, where he now taught entrepreneurship, provided modest compensation that reflected his actual contributions to business education rather than borrowed glory from innovations he had never created. Building a career on borrowed innovation rather than personal expertise. His belated recognition of my contributions carrying the weight of someone who finally understood what he had lost through his own choices. The $27 million repayment plan was progressing according to schedule. Each monthly payment representing accountability for corporate funds he had treated as personal checking accounts while I built the empire he had claimed to run. Kristen's situation provided its own lesson in due diligence as she explained to limited partners how her acquisition strategy had backfired when she failed to research actual ownership structures before orchestrating public humiliation designed to transfer control of a company she had never actually understood. Her reputation remained intact, but her business model had been permanently damaged by assumptions that public perception equals legal reality, when corporate documentation tells a different story. The Martinez acquisition demonstrates the importance of comprehensive ownership research before implementing partnership strategies. She had written in a carefully worded statement to investors who were questioning her judgment after discovering that her romantic theater had been performed without understanding the mathematical foundations of the company she had attempted to acquire. Standing in my honest kitchen, I understood that the best revenge had never been about destroying others, but about finally living authentically on my own terms, building meaningful things with people who actually cared about outcomes rather than appearances. The vintage Omega watch still sat unopened on my counter, a $25,000 reminder of the last gesture I had made as someone else's supporting character before choosing to write my own script according to values that prioritized genuine accomplishment over borrowed glory. Henry and Kristen had faced consequences that reflected their own choices, but my victory was not their punishment. It was my reconstruction of a life based on authentic achievement rather than corporate performance art. The mathematics had worked perfectly. Actions plus consequences equals justice, served with the precision that only comes from understanding that the person who builds the system gets to decide how it operates. The morning routine in my Cambridge townhouse represented everything I had hoped to achieve through years of building technology that mattered. The quiet satisfaction of meaningful work, genuine relationships with people who valued substance over style, and the peace that comes from finally matching your environment to your actual values rather than someone else's expectations. My grandmother's inheritance had funded authentic innovation rather than borrowed glory, honoring her memory through breakthrough technology that solved real problems instead of generating magazine profiles for people who had never understood the algorithms they claimed to have created. Elena Santos would have been proud to see her granddaughter finally claiming credit for work that represented genuine contribution to human knowledge rather than performance art disguised as entrepreneurship. The coffee tasted better when brewed with equipment purchased through honest earnings rather than corporate accounts funded by innovations attributed to someone else. Each morning represented another day of living authentically rather than performing roles designed to make other people successful through my invisible contributions. The mathematics of justice had proven that genuine achievement always prevails when legal documentation confronts manufactured perception. And sometimes the best revenge is simply being right while having the evidence to prove it. If this story of calculated corporate revenge kept you captivated from start to finish, please hit that like button to show your support. My favorite moment was when Isabella discovered those text messages between Henry and Kristen, realizing that her entire marriage had been reduced to a business strategy. What was your most memorable scene from Isabella's journey? Share your thoughts in the comments section below. Make sure you never miss stories of justice served with mathematical precision. Subscribe and activate that notification bell for all our latest uploads.